Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's recap of Week 18 action, brought to you by our partner QuinBet. Regular season now done and dusted, in the books. Bears undefeated in 2025, just like Shane's Patriots and the Carolina Panthers. Onwards and upwards for all of our doomed franchises. Happy Black Monday to all of you joining us on X, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and also live via our website, irishnflshow.com. And happy belated Black Monday to you if you're listening back to the podcast on Tuesday morning. The air is thin at the top of the mountain, of course, and it only gets thinner from here on in as the 14 playoff places and seedings have now been decided. So the Broncos took care of Kansas City's reserves to leave the Bengals out in the cold in the AFC. The Bucs took the South ahead of the Falcons, and the Commanders' win over the Cowboys dropped Green Bay to the 7th seed in the NFC, sending them to number 2 seed Philadelphia for the wild card round. Tennessee gets the number 1 overall pick in the 2025 draft, and after beating the Bills and thus playing their way out of the number 1 pick in the process, the Patriots are searching for a new coach. The Kraft family deciding they're going to hold the Mayo despite picking Jared as the successor to Bill Belichick. So we've plenty to talk about as we close the book on the regular season. We'll run the rule over all the coaching vacancies at various franchises, and we'll assess the lay of the land for each of those who are lucky enough to be left still in the playoffs. Brian O'Leary, Kieran Boyle, and Shane Brennan joining me. Conor Brophy back in harness this week. Like LL Cool J, don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years. And let's get to the talking points, because it is Black Monday. Brian, let's start with which coaches are on the way out. Jared Mayo was the first one that got the axe. He didn't even make it to Black Monday. For fans who maybe haven't followed the sport or are relatively new to the game, Black Monday is the Monday after the regular season ends, when you see the axe fall across the league. Head coaches, general managers, offensive coordinators, and various line coaches and supporting staffs, of course, being given their marching orders by teams who are looking for a new way. And I know we're kind of facetious about it, but at the end of the day, you're talking about people losing their jobs, and it's not something that we should be celebrating. And I know people have strong views about certain coaches, but I think my thoughts always go out to you got offensive line coaches, defensive line coaches, nutritionists, all these people who earn their trade and earn their trade in a sport that they love, who won't be making $5 million being paid by a wealthy owner while they put their feet up on the beach. So it's those people whose hearts we go out to on Black Monday. But let us get to the guys at the top of the pyramid who are responsible for the various travails of their teams, or at least are being held responsible by the people who pay the books. Doug Peterson is out at Jacksonville. We'll get the thoughts of Florida man in a second, but you might say he dug his own grave, Brian.
Yeah, probably one of the ones which was most inevitable. I guess it was a case of when as opposed to if, and it's come as no surprise. Anyone who's followed the show over the course of the season, and Kieran's been very outspoken about the mindset of the fan base in Jacksonville and what they think and what their expectations was of Doug Peterson. Like initially, it was like one of the best choice of head coach in quite some time. Went to the playoffs, turned Trevor Lawrence around quickly after the Urban Meyer chaos fiasco the first season, but obviously over the course of the last year, it's really kind of gone transcended in a different trajectory completely. And it's probably come as a surprise he actually managed to survive the season. There was a period earlier on in the season in particular when you were there to witness it firsthand, Conor, in London, where this team looked completely off and they never really kind of got together. There was a few bright spots over the course of the season, but I think the biggest question mark and the biggest thing today is, and like we're going to get into some head scratching moves, is that the GM Balky has survived yet another firing of a head coach. I mean, we saw we're only a couple of years removed when the fans were there with clown outfits and wishing him gone, and here we are, another cycle of a head coach, and he finds a way to navigate his position carefully and very shrewd, because he's going to remain in situ. I'm not entirely sure if he's going to be how involved he's going to be going forward, because it looks like the new head coach, whoever he used to be, is going to report there directly into the owner, and that for me, it kind of has the writing on the wall for a GM that maybe he should consider moving on himself as opposed to hanging around. But it'd be interesting to see what Kieran has to say, because he's closer to the action and the locality than myself.
Kieran, sometimes you treat us by flicking on links to radio in Jacksonville, and we got some delightful clips today. Like you had one of the radio stations where they were reacting live to the news of Doug Peterson being fired, and guys just can't contain their disbelief and their anger that Trent Baalke's managed to hang on. We don't know what he's got on Shad Khan or how he's managed to ingratiate himself to the point where he survives. This guy has had 3 times the Jags have picked in the top 5 during his tenure. Another head coach bites the dust. 38 draft picks, and he can't construct a roster that can get out of what, let's face it, is not exactly the toughest division in the NFL.
Yeah, it got me through the workday today. Some of the comedy elements. I mean, just like everybody else. I mean, I take a big interest in the Jacksonville Jaguars. I wouldn't call myself a fan, but being in the local area, I take a big interest in what goes on there because you work with people who are fans and all of that kind of stuff. And it makes absolutely zero sense the fact that Balky is still there. And that's that clip that I showed you guys earlier. That just kind of encapsulates everything the Jaguars fans are feeling. It's another kind of I wouldn't call it a stumble. It's another kind of blindly walking into another disaster as far as Jaguars fans are concerned. This is a guy who's got no pedigree, like you said, picking the top 5 3 times. Draft picks have been, very, very poor. I mean, the grade is probably, way down as opposed to other teams. And it's kind of underlined the fact that the Jags Pro Bowl selections are all special teams, punters, kickers, and the long snapper, Ross Matisik.
Hmm.
Making a big deal of all that because that's all the Jaguars have. It's a
But
really
if you wind it back 2 years ago, as Brian mentioned there, and it's very recent that they made the playoffs. They won a game in the wild card round. They'd started the season slowly, became roaring back down the stretch last year. Like they showed plenty about them at times under Peterson. And then the wheels just came off spectacularly. Like Brian referenced that game, which until the weekend was the last game that the Bears won. So it's not as if they were playing the biggest of opposition in London. Like they just looked hopelessly out of sorts in all phases, offense, defense, special teams, which, as you say, they did get together later on in the season. Like nothing looked like it was working. It's a long time since I've seen a coach just lose the run of things in the way he has.
Yeah, and I'm surprised he lasted as long as he did. I mean, I said after the London trip, I thought he was gone then, but it must be a testament to the relationship that Shad Khan has with him. I mean, I was in that stadium 2 years ago. I think it was this weekend 2 years ago when they beat the Chargers. And that's when everybody thought, almost 30 years of this franchise. And now, we're finally belonging to the big time. We got a primetime game and we're winning a playoff game. And ever since then, like you said, last year, they just stumbled to catastrophe. And this year never got going. But it all comes down to Balky. Balky's, the draft picks have been terrible. The free agent signings, looking around the league at the free agents, Van Ginkel, Greenard that the Vikings picked up. I mean, they were all out there that anybody could have taken. And it's, he's not a great talent evaluator. The demeanor's not great. I spent, when I was at Jags training camp in the summer, I spent a lot of time on the sidelines, and he just kind of prowls around, kind of scowls around the sidelines. Doesn't seem all that open to conversations or anything like that. But it's just a testament to this franchise and the mess they're in, that you get rid of somebody like Doug Peterson, who I think he deserved to go. I think he'll probably admit himself. And the rest of the coaching staff, Press Taylor and Ryan Nielsen, will be gone too. But the fact that you keep it Balky on, it makes zero sense. Now I know I have a feeling that I've heard from other people that Peterson was reporting directly to Khan, and the new head coach will do the same thing. So, I mean, you look around the names. Even 4 days ago, a lot of talk in Jacksonville about Ben Johnson being a top pick to go to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Who's going to go there now? Having to work with Balky. And then you're going to have to answer to that to the owner. It's
a really interesting point, Kieran. You've hit on something that I think is really important there, because on paper, Jacksonville is a really good job. Like, it's a great climate. There isn't high expectation. It's not like, I mean, you talk about, and we'll get to it, of course, the Bears job, where okay, you might have the quarterback, but you got massive hype. You got a huge media market. You got fans who are praying for a savior. Jacksonville's not quite the same pressure cooker. It's a handy division versus, say, the NFC North, where your rivals all won double-digit games this year. Jacksonville's a place where the right coach, low income tax as well as everything else, can really succeed. Yeah, great climate and all the rest of it. And then you go and shoot yourself in the foot by basic organizational, or lack of organizational nous, where any savvy head coach, and we know, Ben Johnson will have his pick of jobs, and he's already sent word out through his people that he's going to be very choosy about where he goes. We know he turned his nose up at Washington last year. There's no way this guy's going to end up in Jacksonville, or, as you say, any of the top head coaching candidates, if that's the setup that awaits them versus other places that they could choose to go.
And he should, because it is, like you said, it is a perfect situation. It's not a big market. The expectations aren't as high. You're right in the middle of SEC country, so you should theoretically be pulling in the top talent that's in college that's going to the NFL. You're right in that backyard. I mean, it's right there, but It's just it's a continuation of the mess. You referenced the clown game a couple of years ago. I was at that game too when Urban Meyer was fired and they had the planes flying over. They had people dressed in clown masks and clown hats. It's the same recycled situation for the Jaguars. The fans deserve better. They're a very passionate fan base. They love their team. They love coming out to see them, and they deserve way better than this. And nobody can argue that Doug Peterson deserved to go, but it's just a huge mess in Jacksonville right now. And Khan and Balky went on with the media on Zoom earlier on, and judging by reactions, that sank like the Titanic as well.
Shane, you've been waiting patiently there, and we'll go back to Brian and Kieran on the Giants shortly as we talk about another organisation that's struggling. There are lots of them. It's good company this day, but the Patriots, not an organisation that we associate with dysfunction, and for many years the gold standard in the NFL. Moving on very quickly though from Gerard Mayo, a lot of Patriots fans were concerned that he was appointed in the first place, didn't think he had the CV, and weren't sure that this was the right appointment given what he was facing. And he only survived a year.
Yeah, it's an interesting one as well, because the narrative today is that Robert Kraft heroically stood up in front of the press and admitted the mistake that he made and fell on the sword. And he came out in front of the press conference. The first thing he said is, "Look, I feel bad for Gerard. I put him in this untenable situation, yada, yada, yada." It was very clear to see before Gerard Mayo even got the job last year that he wasn't the right man for it. And I said on this podcast last week, and I said it last night, I think the decision that has been made is the right one. And what made my mind about that, and I think what has made up the minds of people within the Patriots organization, is how bad of a December the Patriots have had. They came out of a bye week to go and play face against Arizona and played like they hadn't slept for 2 weeks. And you get the situation, you get the feeling then that the situation isn't as well led as you thought it could be. And that's not to say that Gerard Mayo can't one day be a good head coach in college or in the NFL, but there is a process that goes to everybody who gets to that stage. There are only 32 people in the world who are head coaches in the National Football League, and it takes time to get up there. And the fact is, Gerard Mayo was not ready to take the job in the first place. And
can I ask you though, the case for the defense here, right? What exactly was the head coach of the New England Patriots expected to deliver this year? Like, what were the KPIs? Did he win or lose any more games than anyone else would reasonably have been expected to do, given the paucity of talents there and a rookie quarterback? In fairness to him, what was he supposed to do?
There isn't a huge amount you can argue in terms of results. I said it before the start of the season that the Patriots head coach had 3 jobs. One was to ensure that the handover to Drake May was handled well. That was done right. One was to keep up the physical nature of the offensive line and the defense in particular. That's where he dropped down in particular. We remember the first game when the Patriots came out and they beat the Bengals, and the first couple of weeks they played against the Seahawks and a couple of others, and you were looking, okay, this is the physical type team that they're going to be. They're going to try and strip back the basics, be physical, because we know that there aren't any skilled players, because there's a severe skill shortage in New England. That is quite clear to say. But the further we get on into the season, the defensive game planning got worse. You can't actually point to any player on the New England Patriots other than Drake May and Christian Gonzalez who improved over the course of the season. You can't even name 10 players that you keep. And I understand that some of that is down to roster issues. And no matter who's the head coach in there, that would have been a very difficult situation to handle. But what was the case if you were talking to Gerard Mayo and you asked him, why should you be trusted to handle Drake May and all of the money that we are maybe likely to spend and all the new draft picks that are going to come in as we can actually take a step forward next year? There wasn't any, because he just wasn't prepared enough. He just isn't good enough. And what made it even worse is every week he came out and he said something in the media, which I think was very short-sighted. We remember against the Jaguars in Wembley, he came out and he straight away, unprompted, it was like, this is a soft football team. That's the kind of thing that, fair enough, the following week they got the result, they got the reaction he wanted. But the further we get into the season, you lose the dressing room there.
All of that said, Shane, what are you getting from Mike Vrabel that's going to be different from that? I don't think Mike Vrabel is Mr. Soft arm around the shoulder. There, don't worry about it. We'll get them next time, champ.
I've said it a couple of times, and I don't know if I said it on the podcast, but I certainly said it in private, that what I do not want is for the Patriots to keep going into a cycle where they're going to keep hiring people who are from the Patriots mold, the so-called Patriot way. The Patriot way, as has been proven.
Matt Patricia, anyone?
But that's the thing. If you look at every head coach which worked under Bill Belichick and see how they've handled themselves, was not play under the Bill Belichick system. Who's a good head coach?
Brian Flores.
Brian Flores is a good coordinator, and even the head coach situation in Miami
He didn't do too badly in the Dolphins.
I still wouldn't take him. It's why I know Ben Johnson, and the name, he's going to be the hottest topic when it comes to head coaching this year. And I have a funny feeling that Ben Johnson is too picky or too smart to go into the Kraft situation if he was given that offer, or if he was interviewed. But what the Patriots need is something completely outside of the building, because they're just going to keep what we're going to get is a Vrabel McDaniel ticket. We've got Josh McDaniel is going to come in and be the defensive coordinator with Mike Vrabel as head coach. And look, what you have there is experience, and what you have there is track record, and what you have there is potential for, I think, more confidence in their ability to move forward. And if Elliott Wolf and the organization decide this year to actually start spending money as opposed to sitting on $120 million of cap space, then you can probably trust them more than you would trust Gerard Mayo to take the team a step forward. But the problem is the decision to give Gerard Mayo the job in the first place was the wrong one. It's as simple as that. And should we give credit for the Patriots for not being stubborn and for making the U-turn and making it quick? I don't know, because they put themselves in the situation in the first place. But it just the more sense I get from the Kraft family and from the situation there, the more I realize it actually probably is messier than a lot of people talk about. You mentioned there the fact that the Patriots are the team that we don't usually associate with being messy and running things wrong. I have a funny feeling we're going to be stuck in this similar kind of situation for years, because what really showed it out is against I know.
Patriots.
I have a funny feeling no one's
Rome
crying.
may fall, what hope is there that any empire can endure, my friend? Anyway, we could talk about the Patriots' misery all day. Brian, I know you wanted to make one quick point about the New England roster before we get on to New York.
Yeah, excuse me. Last offseason, I didn't think there was enough changes made. Wholesale changes, upgrading of the team. Like, people were kind of suggesting Belichick lost the locker room towards the back end of last season. I think Belichick was trying to manage a very poor side, and that poor side continued into the new regime in terms of the new head coach. And when they won in week one against the Bengals, which we always see these quirky week one shocks, and that was probably arguably the biggest shock of the season, bearing in mind how expansive this Bengals offense was over the course of the season. There wasn't enough done to help Jared Mayo, and he was trying to manage essentially the same team which Bill Belichick was managing over the course of last year. I think it's what's pretty clear is the Patriots, outside of what they're going to do in the coaching situation, they need major heart surgery on offensively and defensively within this team. And yesterday, whilst Patriots fans will say, you know what, it's not the end of the world that they go from 1 to 4. I think it's actually a huge blow for them, because that opportunity to be number one, and you don't necessarily need your quarterback. You know yourself, Connor, from the Bears last year, and even the Bears moving from 9 to 1. There's going to be a team that's going to this year, unless we're surprised again, we have no trades on draft and we're all bored for the first hour and a half. But I think this year could be something different, and I think the Patriots have lost out on a big opportunity to get a haul of picks, which would allow them to quickly rebuild. Bring the average age of the team down, and that now unfortunately is not going to be the case. They'll draft well, hopefully, and get themselves back as a challenging team. But there's a big opportunity for me, a big opportunity lost yesterday by winning that game.
Kieran, the Giants, I feel the pain for Daboll and Shane. Oh, no, I don't, because they're both staying.
I mean, it's just numb right now. Apathy is the enemy of progress, and that's where we are right now. This is just, I don't know. I've resigned myself to it today, and I was hoping against hope that there'd be a big change made and that Mara would do something. But it's. I mean, what are you gonna do? It's Mara's press conference today. He's talking about I'm as mad as you guys are, and I'm as frustrated as you are, and all this kind of just sound bites. So, I think they have one. They'll probably get one more year. We'll either get a free agent quarterback, or we'll get a rookie at this stage. But the same issues are there. We don't have talent. There's no talent. The O-line is, unless they spend big and get some free agents. But Shane hasn't drafted well. I mean, 24 was a decent draft. And before that, there's misses everywhere. Deontay Banks, Schmitz, Evan Neal, Thibodeau hasn't done much. So there's way more misses than hits. And I'm just numb to it at this stage. This is a team that I've rooted for more than 30 years. And, from Coughlin, Kerry Collins, the old Meadowlands, Carl Banks, Gary Reasons. Now we're stuck with Dable and Shane. It's just it's a joke, right? It's the Giants have turned into a laughing stock. They're up there with the Jets now. Every time I speak about it every week. Every time Saquon's on TV, you just remind them what a disaster it was. Let him go to the Eagles, and Brian could probably speak to it a little bit better, a little bit more level head, but I'm numb to it, and I got nothing else.
Brian, your feeling?
Having watched John Mara's press conference today, for me, he's getting to the stage in his life and in his tenure as owner of the Giants where he doesn't have the heart to do the hard yards, which essentially is to blow it all up and go again. And part of me understands that because of where he is in his own life, but he's robbing a fan base of an opportunity.
It's funny, isn't it, with some owners, and even Jerry Jones is kind of slipping into this mold. And,
yeah, absolutely.
Some of the others the same way, where you think with time running short in terms of their tenure on this planet, if you like, they might be getting a little bit more trigger happy. Actually, if anything, they get more patient, or as you say, they just lack the will to make the cold-blooded decisions.
Yeah, like Kieran has referred to sound bites, and the sound bites today are predominantly great draft class this year. And Kieran's called out, yeah, but never mind the previous 2 years. Dable was head coach, was the head coach of the year 2 years ago. But also last year he had a defensive coordinator that couldn't wait to get out of the building because he didn't want to work with him. He had an offensive coordinator, Mike Kafka, that wanted to go and be the offensive coordinator with the Seahawks, and they gave him this wishy-washy assistant head coaching role to remain in situ. He's going to go. Brian Dable's press conference today wouldn't fill you with any confidence. He's flapping around questions. You've got a GM who's come out and, to be honest, he looked very smug in his press conference. And I'm looking at it and I'm reacting as in you've very little to be smug about. The team has won 3 games. You've handled a quarterback situation very wrong. The optics of how they managed the Daniel Jones thing in November was terrible. They should have done it in the bye week. They allowed it to move into the following week. Then the players all disgruntled. They go out and give a dead performance against the Bucs. And he just kept referring. And then he was saying, I have no patience anymore. They have to get this right. Essentially means they've got one more year to fix it. You're going to bring in a rookie quarterback potentially, or you make a trade, or you bring in another quarterback. And then in a year's time, you're going to have a situation where a new GM potentially comes in, new head coach says, don't really fancy that quarterback. I don't really like that trade. He's gone. And you're back into a cycle. This was a huge opportunity, bearing in mind where they are picking in the draft, which isn't ideal because they've lost out on the first pick, and now they've got 2 teams ahead of them that potentially could want quarterbacks. That's difficult in itself, but they've lost out on an opportunity to reset completely. GM, head coach, new quarterback, and you go again. You start afresh. And I called it out last week, and now reflecting on it, the Bears cycle is an example, Connor, where they should have reset last summer and they didn't, and now the Bears are in this kind of quandary now where they're trying to make amends very quickly. And now I think the Super Bowls will be in 12 months' time. And one final point, they've got.
And we just talked about why Jacksonville has made a terrible mistake in the same vein. And hey, look where all these 3 franchises are. They're all looking dysfunctional right now. Yeah,
and the final point I'll make is like Shane. What I would say is, and Kieran made challenges. He has got the Giants back in a position where they can challenge financially in terms of free agency. But now I think they're going to end up squandering that and going back to the Dave Gettleman of old, because he's going to have to push the chips in on this free agency to get players in to come and want to play for the Giants. So he's going to overspend to get players in, potentially the likes of T. Higgins. And then ultimately he's probably going to have to push the chips in even more so come draft time if he really wants to get one of these 2 quarterbacks, which Kieran rightly calls out may not even be worth a first pick or a second pick. And so it looks like they're going to go all in to essentially try to save the jobs over the course of next year. And in 12 months' time, they could be back in no man's land, which really scares me.
Won't stay on the coaching carousel for too much longer. Just to run through some of the other changes that have been happening. Ryan Grubb fired as the Seahawks offensive coordinator. Ken Dorsey also out as OC. He's been fired by the Browns, who moved on from Alex Van Pelt, who went to the Patriots, who seemed to kind of move backwards after a really positive season for the Browns last year. One of the interesting ones, though, Shane, that I wanted to maybe spend a little bit of time on before we move on to talking about the showdown at Ford Field, that great Lions-Vikings game from last night. Lou Anarumo sacked as defensive coordinator by the Bengals. Based on the first half of the season, you would have said that might have been on the cards. Based on the way the Bengals finished the season, when defense was just as big a part of the picture as the offense was, as Joe Burrow finished as the passing leader, which seems remarkable considering the struggles that they had on offense for a lot of the season. He really had to carry them. That seems a little bit harsh on Anarumo. Guy was being talked about as a potential head coaching candidate last year, and now he's out the door.
Yeah, you have to wonder how many of these decisions were actually made before we come into this far, because we have to remember the Bengals' strong suit has been in the last five games of the year. At what point did these organizations decide in the middle of November, let's say, that we're not going to hit the panic button now because it's the end of the season to try and get through, and change is just too risky for us right now. But in the long run, this isn't working, and I have a funny feeling that's kind of what happened here in Cincinnati. We've spoken before on this podcast how over the course of the season, the Cincinnati defense has let down the offense. The offense is a top 5 offense in terms of points scored per game and points scored over the course of the season. You're completely right to call out the fact that they have definitely improved in the latter parts of the year, and that's probably will definitely play well into the hands in terms of the future of all of the defensive coaches and the players there as well. But I definitely think that somebody in Cincinnati is having the sat back and is having the long-term view. And also, as well as that, considering that the offense is playing so well, and Joe Burrow, who is by far the highest paid player that this franchise has ever put on their books. One of the few franchises that actually struggles to kind of hit the cap just because of the amount of money that they take in and are willing to put out year on year. What influence do those players, top players and top coaches have in saying, come on, we're doing the work here? Something has to change on that side of the ball. I have a funny feeling that's the kind of decision they maybe made a few weeks ago, because to be fair, if the Bengals defense had been that little bit better in the first part of the season, they'd be in the playoffs right now. It's that simple. So it is harsh. Things move on very quickly in the NFL, but I think this has the scent to me of a decision that wasn't made in December.
Things move very quickly on the Irish NFL show as well. We leave it there for the coaching changes. We'll update you if there's any more before the end of the show. All right, let's talk the showdown for the number 1 seed in the NFC. Great game that took place in the early hours of the morning at Ford Field, or certainly a great game for the Lions anyway. Vikings were well in it until the end of the third quarter, when Detroit really pulled away. Kieran, one of the things I wanted to talk about from this game is the Vikings had me and a lot of other people convinced they're genuine Super Bowl contenders. Everything seemed to be coming together well for them on both sides of the ball. That Brian Flores defense, one of the most feared units in the NFL. Kevin O'Connell getting miracles out of Sam Darnold week in, week out. Justin Jefferson lighting things up again, running over people for fun in the running game. And they go to Ford Field with the number 1 seed up for grabs, bye week available to them, everything on the up and up, and they put up 9 points against the Lions. They got absolutely handled. Was this an aberration, or had the Vikings been shown up?
It could be a little bit of both. I mean, they had a similar kind of game against Jacksonville about a month or two ago when they couldn't get anything going on offense against a poor Jacksonville defense. But Darnold was not at the races at all yesterday. His radar was all off. He was throwing them high, low. He just couldn't connect on anybody.
He's a wide open Justin Jefferson in the end zone that he misses badly on a potential touchdown. Could really have changed the complexion of that game and got them right into it. I think they would have taken the lead at that point if they get that one. Like they're I think 3 times they're inside the 5-yard line and they end up settling for field goals. Crazy.
Yeah,
stuff.
And he's had a couple of games like that. A couple of shaky spots. He had that little kind of spot in the about I think it was week 6 or week 7 when they started getting a little wobbly. But take nothing away. That atmosphere last night was incredible. The noise inside that stadium. I mean, it was affecting both teams. It was a couple of false starts on both teams. With all the noise, but the atmosphere was incredible, and that was an amazing, start to that game. It was just blood and thunder, and everybody was really up for it. It could have been a Super Bowl. That's how loud it was. But I think with the Vikings, I think it's a situation now where they're, if you put both teams up against each other, the Lions and the Vikings, talent-wise, you've got to say the Lions had the edge, and I think that's where it's told last night. Jones is a nice running back, yeah, but Jahmyr Gibbs, I mean, I don't want to say it's an advantage losing Montgomery, but now that he has the entire running game to himself, he's just lapping it up. And he went ham yesterday.
If he stays fit, talk about a guy who wants to be fed. I mean, that extra workload just suited him right down to the ground. He was absolutely untouchable.
Yeah, he was great yesterday, 139 yards. He just ran up and down the field. But it's, I think that the Lions also got a little bit of a boost with Anzalone coming back too. The defense has been, every time there's a Lions game, they're talking about the defensive hits and the loss they got on defense. Having a player like Anzalone come back was a big boost for them. and Hutchinson on the sideline too. That was a psychological boost.
You mentioned the Jags missing out on free agents. So Darius Smith, nice pickup for the Lions as well. Had a great game last night when they needed him to.
Absolutely, and I think it's just when the Lions are at home and you got Campbell getting everybody revved up. It's a different beast. It's a different aura. I mean, the games they had in Minneapolis was similar, but it didn't have the same intensity. Kind of raw. They're just so hungry in Detroit for success. They're so hungry for a win. They're so hungry for anything that they're just lapping everything up right now. They're really behind this team. And I think talent-wise, the Vikings just came up against a better team. Darnold was a little bit up and down, wasn't able to dial in on the throws. And, field goals ain't going to do it. And that's the bottom line. And when you got somebody like Gibbs, that's the difference. I mean, Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't really have that much of a big impact in the game, but when you're able to mix up the offense like that and just get the ball to Gibbs, then that's all you need.
Yeah. One striking thing, Brian, that I thought watching the Lions was you look at where Jared Goff used to be, and his redemption arc is one of my favorite stories in the NFL in the last decade or more. I just love what Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson and that organization have done with a guy who had the label not good enough around his neck not too long ago. But the knock on Goff used to be you get in his face, you get about him, and he just falls to pieces. He's just not the same guy. And one of the really striking things last night was like Brian Flores can put any quarterback in the blender. He's terrified people across the NFL the past couple of seasons, even when he had no pieces on the board last year, with an even stronger pass rush this year with Jonathan Grenard in the mix. He's been really in his bag, and they sent plenty of pressure at Goff, and there was one like cover zero look when they were in the red zone. Unblocked guy comes right through the middle, but what was really striking is both that the offense works in such a way that Goff always has the right option available to him when something like that happens, and he's unhurried and brave, and he's taking the hits. Guys are right in his face when he's letting go of the ball, and he gets that ball out to Gibbs, who just streaks down the middle for a touchdown. There was another one he hit over the middle, a very similar one, not in the red zone and didn't go for a score, but where they had a lovely pickup on a blitz, very similar to that one. And it doesn't seem like you can get to Goff in the way you used to be in the past, and that's credit both to Goff, but also to the offense that the Lions have put around him.
Yeah, it's like he's reinvented himself to a certain extent. His mentality after he lost the Rams was probably quite different. We probably, if it was Goff playing a couple of years ago, we probably wouldn't see the nature of how he can remain in the pocket now and make these plays. Nothing seems to bother him, and this is kind of a testament to what we saw even earlier in the season when they played on the roles reverse game when they were in Minnesota. They were 14-0 down in that game. Goff has been harassed. There was a number of interceptions early on, but he kept his composure and brought them back in that game. They won with a late field goal, and similarity last night. Like, it took a while for him to get going last night. As dominant as the score has, like, it did, the Lions didn't shoot out of the gate like we've seen in previous games over the course of the season. It took a while to get going, but his composure is there. It's telling how he's turned things around. But ultimately, when you've got a head coach to really believes in him, again, there were similarities last night to certain games last year, fourth downs, and you're wondering, are they going to go for it? Again, Dan Campbell straight away, yeah, we're going for it. But that's the confidence he puts in this quarterback. He believes he can make every throw. He has ultimate confidence that he will make every play in every situation. I said last week on the show, Connor, that I felt this was actually prime for a big Lions victory. Maybe not necessarily in the way the game played out with Gibbs getting the 4 touchdowns, but there was so much hype around the Vikings over the course of the last 2 weeks, and the Lions have kind of tailed off slightly. And I thought maybe this actually suited the Lions to go into this game, put the marker down that they're still the best team in the NFC, and in particular the NFC.
I heard very convincing arguments the other direction. Now, I when we made our picks, I think we all went for the Lions in the end. But I could see the argument that this wasn't the worst time to be going into Detroit, that the Vikings might be able to pick on this depleted Lions defense, that Kevin O'Connell would have the playbook, to attack them where they were weakest, but it didn't play out like that. Now, and allowing for the fact that I'm sure the Lions probably in their heart of hearts don't particularly want to see the Vikings for a third time, because it's very difficult to beat a divisional opponent 3 times in the one season. I'm looking around the NFC right now, and I remain to be convinced that there's anyone that can stop this team getting to New Orleans.
I think the Eagles will give them a huge test, even with them playing at home. The Eagles can go into any road game, in a particular game indoors where there's no adverse weather conditions, and I could see them putting up 20 to 30 points on this Lions defenses. Then if they can live with them, this is the thing. These teams in the playoffs are going to have to live with this Lions team.
I'd actually, if I was Detroit, I'd nearly be worried more about the divisional game, because you'd probably end up with either the Vikings or the Rams, both of whom know this team well, and both of whom have a really good reason and are really sore about losses that they've suffered there.
Yeah, look, if I don't see it happening, but if the Packers were to find a way to navigate a victory on Sunday, they would immediately go into Detroit, and the Packers have played the Lions very tough this season in both games. So there is an argument that they could, again, divisional games and playoffs, we've seen over the past, we've seen over the years, Giants in particular, NFC East games, they find ways to navigate victories, and you could see it again if that was the case. We saw the Saints, who had a great record against the Bucs for years. Brady goes into New Orleans, win. Divisional games are quickly the best of times. We saw it yesterday with how difficult the Bucs found it to beat a poor Saints team. If it's a playoff game in a division, it could be a strange type of game. But right now, it's hard to see who can live with this Lions team. I just want to make a final point on the Vikings, Connor. Like you kicked it off with the redemption piece around Goff and Sam Darnold. If the Vikings go one and done, I think the Sam Darnold conversation comes to an end very quickly. I think he won't be back in Minnesota. I think they've got a quarterback in situ there. They want to move on to JJ.
I know it's only one game and you don't overreact, but I was saying in the chat last night, looking at that game, I thought Darnold looks like a guy who just was seeing ghosts again. He looked like Jets Sam Darnold in that moment, because that's a massive pressure game. That's effectively a playoff game. There was an awful lot on the line there, and it's very different being the great underdog story. Nobody expected anything from you. We thought we'd be watching JJ McCarthy in that uniform this season. Darnold was a great feel-good show, but when you get right down to the white heat of a game like that, I'm not sure he's the man for the moment from what I saw last night.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I think Monday night, again, is another massive test. They've already lost in SoFi against the Rams this season on a Thursday night football game, individual game, prime time. He's going to go up against Matthew Stafford, who's won a Super Bowl, has been back to the playoffs. We're unfortunate last year to use the Lions. And the Vikings are 2-point favorites with Quinn Beck going into this game. The expectation is it's going to be a tight one and they'll squeak out a victory. But again, the eyes of the world, are going to be on this game next Monday. And the pressure will be on them, especially to react to the difficult performance yesterday and the Vikings. People still expect the Vikings to go far in the playoffs, but I think if any team is going to turn over next weekend in terms of an underdog winning a game, I don't think it'd be a huge shock, but I think the Rams, for me, are primed to be the team that could win next weekend.
Shane, you did actually pick the Vikings. Sorry, I was trying to spare your blushes. I said we'd all gone for the Lions, but you did pick the Vikings. So you did see something about them. And I think we were all kind of 50-50 on where we were going to call that game. Easy to be wise now in hindsight because it finished the way it did. But that Vikings-Rams game is one of the ones I'm looking forward to most, I have to say, out of the playoff games for the week ahead. It's going to be tough for the Vikings to bounce back. It's not necessarily an easy place to have to navigate your way through, as Brian has just outlined. Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay really know what they're doing, so it's a potential banana skin. But the Vikings will want another shot at Detroit, and this is their path to doing that.
They say it's a banana skin, but only 2 head coaches have managed to beat the Vikings so far this year. Dan Campbell did it twice with the Lions, and Sean McVay did it on week 7, I think it was, when the Rams beat the Vikings by 30 points to 20. And what I found interesting, and look, I backed the Vikings to win this one. I found it very difficult to call. I thought it'd be a hell of a lot closer than it was, because I was expecting the Vikings to play like they had done in their 8-week winning streak. The problem is, though, I think there is a big difference mentality in terms of the mentality of the Vikings when it's a run-of-the-mill regular season game, when it's week on week, when whatever happens this Sunday, we're just looking ahead to next week, we keep moving on. And last night was effectively a playoff game. I know it wasn't really, it wasn't knockout, the season wasn't going to end. But in terms of the preparation, in terms of the attention that the game got, in terms of what the game meant, it's as close to a playoff game as you're ever going to get in the regular season. And it affected them mentally. Sam Darnold, I think, as you mentioned there, looked like he was seeing ghosts. There's a lot of times he looked very unconfident in himself in the pocket. It affected him on special teams, sort of kickoffs and missed kicks.
Van Ginkel, he hangs on to that interception and he rumbles to the end zone. Like a lot of just basic poor execution at key times.
Yeah, I mean, what was it? I think they were in the red zone 4 times. I didn't manage to get a touchdown out of any of those situations. And even on defense as well, I felt like that they were spent too much time trying to get to the quarterback, that by the time that the ball was handed off to Jahmyr Gibbs, most of the defensive line was already caught up. It's targeting the wrong man. And I feel like some of the play calling there, even sort of the bottle was maybe lost a little bit in the Vikings. And I was very surprised at that. I always thought that the Vikings will come into this with a stronger all-around game plan and would have a better sense of execution. It makes me fear for them point of view when they go into plays against a Sean McVay's team, because like the Rams are experienced in the situation. They're confident in what they have to do. There isn't a huge amount of expectation on their side, but they have the experience of having gone and won games. And even you look at what McVay is able to do. They played a bunch of backups yesterday against Seattle and still nearly won the game with oh geez, I can't remember the name of the quarterback.
Jimmy Garoppolo.
Jimmy G.
I can't believe I forgot Jimmy G. I feel like I'm trying to banish him from my
handsome,
memory.
Shane. How could you forget his name?
I know. I'm too busy looking at his face. But that shows to me what McVay can do. And I think, look, we have a bit more time before this game comes around. And I was looking back at the matchup that they had last time. And one thing in particular is that it's relatively unusual for the Rams to get a lot of room on the ground. And similar to Jared Goff is slightly more of that kind of old-fashioned pocket passer type presence in comparison to the more scrambling, rambling types. And Matthew Stafford is that similar kind of quarterback. And I think that is maybe a weakness that the Vikings will have come into this matchup. So yeah, certainly in terms of their composure last night, I'd be slightly leaning towards the Rams at this point, but there's a whole week to go before the game actually kicks off.
I'm smiling here, Shane, just as you're talking, because I reminded myself of a tweet I saw earlier today from ESPN's Mina Kimes. It was the Jimmy G thing triggered it in my brain. Mina Kimes had this tweet about somebody she knows who won their fantasy league, having picked a team purely based on looks.
Yeah,
and the tweet was from the guy saying, "I won my league. I wanted Jimmy G, but I ended up with Patrick Mahomes." It's like, that's probably the only time anyone's ever going to utter a sentence like that, just purely because they wanted Jimmy G based on looks. Damn, he's a handsome fella all the same. Anyway, NFC South, Brian, turned out to be a lot more fun than perhaps we expected. It's a division that we slag off a lot, but it gave us fireworks on a day where there were precious few. To be fair, it wasn't the most exciting week 18 because so many things had already been decided before we went to the final day of games. But Carolina Panthers gave us an entertaining game against the Falcons to end their hopes, but it wouldn't have mattered whether the Falcons had pulled that one out anyway, because the Bucs were doing some interesting things on their side of the draw. And shout out to Mike Evans, who's first ballot Hall of Famer if ever I saw one, like tying that Jerry Rice record, 11 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, something we never thought we'd ever see anyone do again. That's incredible stuff.
Yeah, slightly concerned for the Bucs going into the playoffs, to be honest. I know they've won the division for the fourth year in a row, and it's probably the nature of how poor this division is. But over the course of the last month, we had Baker Mayfield playing with his head on fire. He's fantastic, and everyone was raving about him. And they've had some stellar victories over the course of the season. But they lost to the Cowboys on a Sunday night football game. Poor Cowboys team. Had an opportunity to win the game later on, but obviously it was a fumble. And then yesterday, they never really got going. And I think the Saints just kind of ran out of juice over the course of the game, as opposed to the Bucs doing miraculous things to get themselves back into it. They looked off, and we've seen that over the course of the season, in particular at home. They lost to the Broncos at home. They've lost to other teams at home. Their home record this year hasn't been at the level. And I think the Commanders came back yesterday and saw kind of Cliff Kingsbury on the sideline. And it wasn't probably the fact that they beat the Cowboys in the division games, more around this team looked like they're going in the right direction. Dan Quinn, I think if he's looking at being selective of where he would want to go and play a playoff game on the road. I said last week I thought he might be one and done. I'm starting to kind of come back on that, because this doesn't kind of fill me with this kind of concern of whether they had to go into SoFi. It looked like initially they were going to go in and play the Rams, and I thought that's too big an ask for them. But going into Tampa against a team for me that are just too up and down right now, and I think if they can get out early with Jaden Daniels and get a lead, I think they could potentially cause an upset. It's another one that I feel is very much up for grabs. In terms of the Falcons are the Falcons. This is the Falcons of old. This is the Falcons of new. They find new ways to lose games. I felt the game against the Commanders was there for them last week. I think Penix is probably proving over the course of last week's why he's justified to be in that selection. I understand the nature of why they've moved on, but their defense needs a huge work over the course of the offseason that they can allow a team like Bryce Young, as well as the Panthers have played of late, to allow them to put up 30-odd points on them at home. That's very concerning.
Like, name a Falcons pass rusher, like answers on a postcard. When did they ever get to the quarterback? We've been talking about this for 2 years.
And beyond, they just don't seem to have that stellar defense. Even going back to when They brought in OCU and Euro for the Giants. That's how far we're going back. That team that made the Super Bowl and the ultimate collapse. Like that team was solidified by a good defense over the course of the season. No household names, but as a collectively, as a unity, they played quite well that season. But they just they haven't done well. If they hadn't won the division, for me, they definitely would be the type of team that would be one and done in the playoffs. And it brings us back to that conversation, Connor, around whether the divisional winner should actually even host a home game. For the Bucks, I think it's a huge opportunity for the club.
Yeah, let's just say that Shane is wrong on that one. We won't even go into that
discussion. I don't think Colin would agree with you either. I think
he's not here either.
I could be completely barking up the wrong tree. I think the Commanders have a huge opportunity to go and win it the weekend. It'd be interesting to see what the guys think.
Yeah, we'll get to that momentarily, but let's jump over to the AFC first, because Kieran, the Broncos are back in the playoffs. Last time they were in the playoffs was when they won the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 50. In I won't say in controversial fashion from a Broncos perspective. They went there and took care of what was in front of them. They beat the Kansas City reserves, but not a good look for the league. The KC pulls all its starters for the final game of the regular season. To be fair, they earned the right to do that. They had the number 1 seed locked in. That's no fault of Kansas City's, and they get 25 days to rest Patrick Mahomes and others ahead of the divisional round. But they surrender a game 38-0, to the point where Sean Payton even knew that was going to happen and didn't take chances in the Broncos' 2 previous games where they could have rubber stamped their passage to the playoffs. But it's something doesn't smell right when that can happen. It's a short enough season, the NFL, even as it is, with 17 games. You do not want complete dead rubbers on the last day of the season where a team can just jack it in like the Chiefs were able to.
No, absolutely not. And I think Goodell is going to be very sensitive to this. The knock on the NBA over here is there's too many games, there's too many meaningless games. Stars are rested for playing, twice in a week. It's a situation where, fans are going to games expecting to see the superstars and they're resting, or they might get a couple of minutes at the start of the game. It's not a good look for the league. Nobody wants to see teams get dog walk like that, even if it is the Chiefs. But, it's, until a fix is made and a fix that's, equitable. Again, that's what the Chiefs did by virtue of winning all those games.
And I'm sure, again, to be fair to the Chiefs, and I'm sure the NFL Players Association, the NFLPA, would have a voice on this as well. You're making us play 3 games in 11 days at the end of the season. What do you expect us to do? Guys are dropping like flies if they're going to be put through the meat grinder like this. Yeah,
but the great thing about the NFL is the parity, and anybody can win on any given Sunday, and any team that may be garbage can beat the top king. So I know Goodell's ears are definitely pricked up when he saw some of that stuff going on yesterday. So I would expect some changes. I don't know how the changes are going to be made, but nobody wants to watch a game. I mean, the Broncos loved it because they guaranteed the spot in the playoffs. But it wasn't a game. It wasn't a spectacle. It wasn't any kind of contest. When you're playing second and third stringers, good for the Broncos. I mean, they needed the win. They finally got over the hump. I mean, it would have been disastrous if they had lost to those second and third stringers. But again, we'll talk about teams that might be one and done, and I'm definitely on the one and done with the Broncos. I don't think they've anything to scare anybody, especially going into Buffalo.
Shane, the Steelers lost to the Bengals, who were still pushing for that playoff place that ultimately they needed snookers to get, and thanks to the Broncos, they didn't get. But because of the Steelers' loss to the Bengals and the Chargers' win on the weekend, Steelers dropped a place, and that could prove very costly as far as their ongoing progress in the playoffs is concerned, because you swap, I'm not going to say a handy trip to Houston, but certainly a lot handier than heading to Baltimore.
The problem is, though, with these AFC North matchups, it becomes more difficult to predict. We've talked so many times about the way that the Ravens in particular are a team that manage to drop more against their divisional opponents than they do against other stronger teams. Like, I feel like, not to use the word banana skin, I feel like it's thrown around a lot these days. We shouldn't really be using the word banana skin when we're talking about teams who are in the playoffs. But it is interesting that the Ravens have come into this as clear favorites against the Steelers team, who have completely lost steam. They're another team that had to play 3 games in 11 days and lost all 3 of them, including against the Chiefs on Christmas Day. They have a worse win record now with Russell Wilson as quarterback than they did with Justin Fields. Interestingly enough, the defense definitely looks like it is taking a step back, and they're facing against a Ravens team who have every reason to believe they're going to be strong going into this. But for me, the big piece on the Steelers And we talk so much about quarterbacks, so we can talk so much about the physical nature. And I'm sure by the time the game comes around in Baltimore, things like the weather, the game plan, how intimately these two teams know each other will make this game feel a little bit more unique in comparison to other AFC matchups. But the thing that which strikes me is, firstly, the increasing reliance of Pat Freiermuth in particular as the receiving, as the sort of main receiving target for Russell Wilson. I know people may talk too much about that missed catch he had at the end of the game when the Steelers had a chance to move forward, but there's only so much you can do, I think, against in the modern aerial offense NFL when your main attacking threat is a tight end. Because he's strength, he can get catches.
I beg to differ, because with Zay Flowers going down on the other side of the ball, you'll have Andrews, who is, probably a little bit too late to be the comeback player of the season, but down the stretch for Baltimore has been an absolute diamond.
I get that, but Baltimore has a much better running game to lean on than Pittsburgh do. So I think there's too much on that. And secondly,
it's much better. They have Derrick Henry. Like they don't have a running game. They have Derrick Henry.
And they have Lamar Jackson as well.
Yeah, true.
They have Lamar Jackson as well. I think that does make them more difficult to defend, and it's a defense of Pittsburgh, which I certainly changed my view in terms of their ability to pressure the quarterback and get sacks. And we did see, in fairness, I think who was it? Was it Trey Henderson? Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong stats, but we did see a lot of I guess a better sense of quarterback pressure coming in for the Steelers against the Bengals. I think they ended up getting 4 sacks on Joe Burrow. But the problem is, it's like that sense of solidity, that sense of game plan to account for situations, to read when the run is coming, to read when the pass is coming, to read when it's going deep, to read when it's going shallow. I just don't think it's as strong as it was in the first part of the season, and that's going to make it very difficult against the Ravens, who are, as we know, one of the most unpredictable teams in the league because of Lamar Jackson's ability to do just about anything he wants on the ball if given space to do it. So I do think this game has definitely cause to be much more interesting than it is on paper, considering the run of defeats that the Steelers are on.
I hear you on that one. You would think that the Steelers will probably end up regressing to the mean in a positive way because they've just been so poor over the past couple of weeks. You would think they can't continue to play that badly, and the thought of going to a familiar foe like that, with the unpredictability that comes with divisional rivalry, may well be the tonic that they need. But Kieran, Shane had mentioned that Steelers relying on Pat Freiermuth as their main receiving threat. I suppose that wouldn't be the case if George Pickens could actually catch a ball.
I mean, I've been saying it for a good long time. George Droppins. I've been saying it for a long time. There is something rotten in the state of Denmark with this guy. He is a fish out of water in a town like Pittsburgh. Blue collar, hardworking. Bring your lunch pail. Do what you're supposed to do.
He's John with the fans, to your point. Acrisure Stadium is one place where you do not do that.
You do not jaw with the Yinzers because you're not going to win. That's the bottom line. And he was awful the other night. 6 targets, 3 drops. 1 catch, 0 yards. I mean, that's a stat line of all stat lines. I think that the Steelers are looking at him and they're embarrassed. They're like, this is not going to work out. Too mouthy, too brash, too anti-Pittsburgh. And I think his attitude is really the antithesis of what Pittsburgh is. So his performance was terrible. But can we talk a little bit real quick about Tomlin? And we're almost celebrating mediocrity. Yeah, he's had winning seasons, the entire time he's been there. But at what cost? They haven't had a playoff win since the 2016 season, I think. I mean, they just get in and they're one and done. It's a situation where they're almost celebrating mediocrity, and it's Tomlin and it's this and it's that, the SC North. If any of the teams are a one and done in the playoffs, I think it's Pittsburgh. Their offense is anemic. They're relying too much on TJ Watt and Boswell. I expect them to be bounced out pretty quickly. I just don't rate that team at all right now.
Brian, that wouldn't necessarily be a shock, but we said we'd conclude the show this evening by looking at maybe which each of us thinks is the one that's ripe for the picking, from Pickens to picking. Who do you think may take a tumble on wildcard weekend, and who's your call out for the potential surprise of the weekend?
I don't think the Rams winning would be a huge surprise, despite the successful season and the record in which the Vikings have. So I would run with the Commanders. I just think the Bucs are don't get me wrong, in their own right, they're very good offensively. They can be very explosive, and maybe they'll turn into playoff books, which we've seen over the course of the last couple of years. Even last year, we did a stellar win against the Eagles and really gave the Lions everything to think about in that divisional round. But I think the Commanders are on a bit of a crest of a wave right now, having got it back on track recently with the win against the Falcons and obviously coming back late, albeit against a second-string Cowboys team. I think the Falcons could go in on Sunday Night Football. Sorry, the Commanders could win on Sunday Night Football and potentially turn over the Bucs. I think that could be the one of the surprises that springs upon us come next week.
Having glanced briefly at the bracket, I'm not seeing a huge number of surprises, so I'm going to jump in really quickly and pick an underdog. They're not much of an underdog. They're catching 3 points, the Chargers in Houston, but I think the Chargers could take the Texans out. I kind of fancy them to pull off a minor upset there, and that's my pick for the weekend. Shane?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Chargers, although I wouldn't call it an upset, I definitely think that out of all the road teams, they have the best chance of winning. I think the Buccaneers, just to counter Brian, I think the Buccaneers are due a good week and are probably going to have a complete collapse the following week. I think they'll be strong. But in terms of who's going to pull off the biggest surprise, I definitely look at the Rams. I was saying earlier how that matchup in particular probably suits the Rams well. I know the Vikings have played so well during the regular season, but I think, and the Vikings as well have a penchant of winning close games. I fancied the Rams in that one.
Kieran, you got a shock for us?
Well, this round always throws up an unexpected, result. Last year it was the Eagles and Cowboys getting bounced. I actually think that Green Bay is going to do the business. I think it's going to be a massive surprise. I think every year there's a result that nobody thinks about. And a lot of these matchups are pretty even. I mean, Texans, Chargers.
You're giving me post-traumatic shock now because, I know self-praise is no praise. I went 12-1 in the playoffs last year. The one freaking game that eluded me was I didn't pick the Packers to beat the Cowboys in Arlington. And, maybe you could be onto something there.
Well, listen, I got a hot hand. I had the Jets winning by 10 yesterday, so I'm going to ride the Packers. Let's go, Pack.
Why did you pick the Jets after everything you've said about the Jets this season?
Listen, it's the aura of Rodgers.
Connor, just a quick one on that. Let's bear in mind that they played each other on the Friday night, week 1 in Brazil, and it was a bit of a quirky game, and the Packers had some huge opportunities. I know a different landscape, different game. It was a home game for the Eagles, but the Packers had some huge opportunities in that game, and that game only got away from them late in the fourth quarter. Yeah. I think the line in itself that QuinnBet and other betting partners have out there, I think it's -5.5. It's not the biggest one of the weekend, but I thought it'd be closer. I think people are doing the Packers a disservice.
Yeah. I wonder did the Watson injury have something to do with that? I don't necessarily think that that's going to slow them down. I mean, like it's LaFleur has that spread it out offense that's not like it runs through him. I mean, he's you'd rather have him than not have him, but they've coped without him before. Other guys have stepped up. That's the nature of this offense and the nature of the way LaFleur has them going. I can see that happening. I'm not necessarily sure the Eagles are all that either. I think they've taken care of business against a lot of weaker teams. I would think the Packers wouldn't be overly overawed by having another look at them. I'm not necessarily sure they pull it out there, but I think that could be very competitive.
One little wrinkle: the country is in for a gigantic freeze over the weekend. So Philly might feel like Lambeau West or Lambeau East. It's going to be cold, like Lambeau cold.
But every Lambeau cold game, like they always talk about the frozen tundra and the Packers freaking lose there. I remember the 49ers went in there and bullied them. Remember Tom Coughlin's nose was nearly falling off and they won that one. Maybe
it's
just unseasonably warm.
There's a big upset there somewhere.
Yeah, I guess the one thing, sorry, just on that game, has anybody heard or know what's happening with Jalen Hurts? Like, how is he been training? How is he performing? What's the story with his?
They said today he still remains in concussion protocol, but trending towards playing, which is inevitable.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that throws up more question marks than that people are giving credit for because the Eagles have played so well early on in the season. I just feel like the fact that there's no information coming out about that is very quiet means I don't know. I'll keep an eye on that one as the week goes on. Anyway.
All right, let's look at the games before we wrap up. So we've got Chargers at Texans. That's the Saturday game, 9:30 our time. As we said, Chargers 3-point underdogs there. We've got the Steelers at Ravens, as we said, a divisional game repeated in the wildcard round. That's the 1 a.m. Sunday morning game. Let me look at the odds there quickly. Baltimore 10-point favorites in that one. Wow, that's a significant line there. Broncos at Bills. That's Sunday 6 o'clock game for us. A handy evening game there. Buffalo 9-point favorites again. Probably not as much as a surprise as the line in the Ravens Steelers game. Over in the NFC, then we've just talked about the Packers at the Eagles, as Brian said. Packers. Philly is narrowed to 4 points now. I'm seeing just on the latest odds there. Commanders going to Tampa to play the Buccaneers. That's the Monday morning game, 1 a.m. on Monday morning. Commanders are 3-point underdogs there. Bucs home favorites, of course, in that one. That's the one that Brian's called out as the potential shock of the weekend. You can see the Commanders overcoming that spread and winning in Tampa. And finally, then the Vikings going to the Rams, where Minnesota is actually the 1.5-point underdog on the road there against the Rams. Very narrow spread there. Pretty much a pick 'em or toss it up game there as far as the bookies are concerned. You can check out the latest odds, of course, with our betting partner, QuinnBet, and we'll have a special for wildcard weekend as well. So keep an eye out on that across our social channels. Thanks very much to all of you who've been tuning in to us live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and on X. If you're picking up the podcast, please do remember to like and subscribe wherever you find the Irish NFL Show so we can continue to grow the army. We'll talk to you real soon.